This is FluentCast. Real English, real conversations, real confidence.
Hey, and welcome back to FluentCast. If this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found us. And if you've been listening for a while, then you already know I'm Diego. And let me start this podcast today in a very honest way. If you ever looked at an English word and thought, okay, this makes absolutely no sense, I just want you to know something right away. That reaction is healthy. Because English is weird. Not a little weird, deeply weird. And what I want to do today is not to fix that weirdness, not simplify it, not turn it into rules or lists, but understand it. Because the moment you understand why English is strange, it stops feeling hostile and starts feeling human. And that moment, that is curiosity waking up. So, today I want to take you behind the scenes of English to understand where all this weirdness comes from and why, once you see it, English becomes less intimidating. Most learners have a moment, sometimes many moments, when English just feels unfair. You learn that the verb read can be written the same way in the present and past. Same spelling, but different sounds. You learn that the sequence of letters O, U, G, H can sound quite weird. Words like though, through, thought, cough, rough. All of them have the same sequence of letters, but the pronunciation completely different. At some point, you stop being confused and you start being tired. You think, why would anyone design a language like this? And here is the first important thing to understand. English was never designed. English is not one clean system, it's a collision. And collision is a good word here. A collision is when things hit each other without planning. English began as a Germanic language spoken by tribes who arrived in Britain more than 1,500 years ago. Then came the Vikings, bringing Old Norse. Then, in 1066, the Normans arrived, and they spoke French. And they didn't politely blend languages, they ruled, which meant something very specific. French became the language of power, law, and prestige. English stayed the language of ordinary people. And this is where things get really interesting. You probably know this example, but let's slow it down. Farmers spoke English. They raised cows, pigs, and sheep. The Norman, the elite, spoke French. They didn't raise animals, they ate them. So the animals in the field was a cow, but on a table it became beef from a French word boeuf, spelled B-O-E-U-F. Same animal, different social class and different word. English didn't choose between these words, it kept both. And that pattern repeated again and again. I'd say that is not vocabulary chaos, that is history frozen inside words. When we say English is layered, we mean that it was built in historical layers, not logically. Like a city where Romans built roads, medieval people built houses on top, and modern people added highways. Nothing was removed, everything stayed. That is why English feels heavy sometimes. You are carrying centuries of history every time you speak. Now, let's talk about spelling, and this part really matters. English spelling didn't become strange because people were careless. It became strange because, let's say, technology arrived at the wrong moment. When the printing press reached England in the 15th century, English pronunciation was changing very fast. Printers needed consistency. They froze spelling, but pronunciation kept evolving. And then something else happened. Printers were often influenced by Latin and French, so they added letters back to the words to look more sophisticated, educated. That is why the word doubt has a silent B. It comes from the Latin word dubitare. That is why island has a silent S, even though it was never pronounced. So spelling became, let's say, a museum, pronunciation became a living thing. And now learners are expected to memorize both. Honestly, anyone would struggle. Another thing learners notice quickly is this. English doesn't stop at one word. It gives you 5 or 10. And again, history. When we look at English vocabulary, we notice something interesting. Words that came from Old English, our Germanic roots, tend to be short, direct, and physical. Words like ask, help, start. These were words of everyday life spoken by ordinary people. Later, English absorbed a large number of words from French and Latin, especially through the church, the courts, science, and government. These words often sound more formal or abstract, like request, assist, initiate. English never chose one group of words over the other. Through centuries of invasion, education, and cultural exchange, it kept them all. So now we have ask and request, help and assist, start and initiate. And that is what makes English so flexible. It gives us multiple ways to say the same thing, the same idea, letting us control tone, formality, and emotional distance. But that flexibility only works if you are aware of these differences and confident enough to experiment with them. English is extremely expressive, not exactly efficient. Expressive means the language gives you tools to show attitude, emotion, and intention, not just information. That is why two sentences can mean the same thing but feel completely different. Here's the shift I really want you to make. Instead of asking, why is English so illogical? Try asking what kind of history would create a language like this? Because suddenly English stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a survivor. By the way, if you are enjoying this way of looking at English, this is exactly what we do here on FluentCast. So make sure you are subscribed so you won't miss any new episode. Alright, let's keep going. Some words, some English words, are hard to translate into other languages. Words like awkward, cringe, and weird. That is because these words don't describe one clear thing. They describe a feeling. When you say something is awkward, you are not explaining it in detail. You are saying, you know that uncomfortable feeling? Yeah, that. These words grew naturally as people shared experiences and feelings over time. Everyone who speaks the language understands them, even if they can't explain them perfectly. So, if you are learning English and these words feel confusing, that's normal. It's not your fault. Some words aren't learned from a dictionary. They are learned by hearing them, feeling them, and using them with other people. I've watched many adults, intelligent, thoughtful people lose confidence because they thought their confusion meant incompetence. It doesn't. Confusion means you are touching something complex, and complexity doesn't deserve shame, it deserves time. English is weird because people are weird. We invade, we borrow, we copy, we misunderstand, and we keep talking anyway. And English kept all of that. So if English feels strange to you, that doesn't mean you don't belong in it. It means that you've stepped into a living story. You don't need to love every weird word. You don't need to understand all of English history. But if you replace frustration with curiosity, learning becomes lighter. And if you want help navigating English as it actually exists, with real explanations, real conversations, and no fluency myth, that is exactly how we work at Fluent English Academy. Thank you so much for being here today, exploring a little bit more of English language, and I'll see you in our next episode next week. Take care. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
FluentCast is a production of Fluent English Academy. To learn English in a natural and practical way, visit www.fluentenglishacademy.com.br.